Welcome to Season 4 of the Get Out of Teaching podcast presented by Larksong Enterprises. This podcast is for teachers who are considering leaving education but feel like they have no options. I'm your host, Elizabeth Diakos. I'm a career transition coach who guides overwhelmed teachers through a 5-step process out of education and into a life they love. I'd like to see a world where the work of teachers is valued and respected, and that teachers have a career pathway that enables them to continue to offer value to society beyond their work in the classroom. So in this season, we'll be speaking to other experts who help people to change careers, as well as a few ex-teachers who've forged a pathway into something new. So come along for the ride as we get out of teaching. Episode 8. Hi everyone and welcome to the show. And on today's show, I'm very pleased to be interviewing Georgina Chai, who's a resume writer and interview coach. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, Georgina.
Thanks for having me, Elizabeth. I'm really pleased to be here.
So this is one of the interviews that I've been most excited to do, because when I talk to teachers about getting out of teaching, or even before I even have a conversation with them and they join the Get Out of Teaching Facebook group, the thing they're most worried about more than anything is their resume. And I'm like, we need to talk to someone who's all over this. So I'm really pleased that you're here with us today. What should we be thinking about when we go to write a new resume, when we're moving out of education and into something else? What are the things we need to consider?
You know, the first question that I ask my clients before I start working on their resume is, where or what role do you see yourself moving into next from teaching? Their response to this question is so important, because it goes on to frame their next resume. So the work that you do with the teachers who are in this situation is so important, Elizabeth, because you're getting them to, think about their next step. And without, I guess, having invested that time in that process, they really shouldn't be too concerned about their resume yet, because it really is so vital for them to know what their next goal is before they invest in doing their resume, because then they'll have a resume that is clear about their direction. And it really helps a recruiter to really see where that next direction is. Because I always say, there's no point having a resume that looks like a dog's breakfast and it's unclear, because then the recruiter doesn't know what to do for you either, because they're like thinking, where would you like to go next? And they probably don't have that time to make that decision for you. So you, as the person who is in charge of your career, needs to be very clear about, where you want to head next.
Yeah, so that's so true. Like when I was trying to get out, I actually went to see an HR. I saw two people. I saw a career, I'm not exactly sure what they were, but someone sent me to them, and they said, you might want to have a portfolio career. And I didn't know what that was at the time, but basically it's where you have multiple streams of income coming in from doing different activities or selling a product or whatever. And so you're making a living, from maybe 3 or 4 different ways. And then the other person was an HR expert, and we did talk about my resume a little bit there. But for both of those conversations, I still didn't know what else I could do, and they didn't recognize what I brought to the table, and I was still grieving the loss of my teaching career. So I was in this terrible sort of mental state where I felt really upset that I kind of woke up one day and thought, I don't think I can keep doing this. And I started looking at possibilities, and I just couldn't see a way forward. So there was grief, there was massive confusion, and I felt really undervalued outside of education and inside of education. So it was kind of this, it was not a good place to be. And so part of my motivation for doing what I do now, helping people make that transition, is because of that experience that I had. So when you so let's say I've used this example in another conversation. I've got this archetypal teacher named Donna, and she's in her, let's say early 50s, and she wants to move out of education, and she's thinking she'd like to work somewhere that's clean and nice. Maybe she gets to wear high heels occasionally, or at least like nice clothes that won't get paint or snot on them. And maybe she'd like to be able to go to the toilet whenever she wants and have a proper lunch break, and maybe even, dare I say it, go to an appointment during work hours and then make up the time some other time. What kind of roles should she be preparing for, and what would go on her resume?
Right. So it sounds very much like she wants to get into a corporate role. I mean, the nice clothes, maybe the high heels. But at the same time, it also sounds like she could become a business owner, you know? So that's a possibility that maybe people don't really think about when they're looking to transition into a different role out of teaching. Because sometimes, you know, when I sit down with a client of mine and I ask them questions, it sounds more like they want to be their own business owner rather than wanting to move into, you know, a role or be, you know, in a different, be employed by a different organization. So I think it's really, you know, with those sorts of roles anyway. So let's say, you know, she wants to go into a corporate role. I think, you know, you want to talk about your communication skills, which is very, very vital. And in that particular environment, you're talking about different stakeholders, internal, external. So, you know, from her experience as a teacher, want to look at, you know, where has she dealt with various stakeholders, internally, externally. Your organizational skills, how you meet deadlines. That's always a critical one or any corporate role. So how has she demonstrated that in her career?
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
if we're
so those
going
are
to,
probably the two most critical ones.
yeah, so if you're going to write that in a resume, what does that sound like? Because my experience is that as soon as you mention the word classroom or student, it's like the shutters come down and no one's interested in hearing what you have to say, because they think they have this understanding of what education is and what it is to be in the classroom, and they think that it's that they've only experienced education from the point of view of being a student. If you're in the HR role, you've probably only been a student, and you think the teacher just comes and sings and dances and plays with you all day and then goes home to their fairy castle or whatever. But the reality is very different. And so how do you, as a teacher, explain that skill set in a way that's going to get through to someone in an HR role, or get past the search engine that they use, the artificial intelligence search engine that the recruiters use before they even look at your resume?
Yeah. So a simple little trick there is really about corporatizing, you know, the language that you use in your resume. So what you were referring to there was the application tracking system. And basically, an application tracking system is like a robot that reads your resume, your job application. And basically, all that's happened there is, you know, a company's decided, okay, we are wanting, you know, this specific role, we want to fill this specific role. And here are the keywords that we associate with this particular role. And as a you know, when you put together your job application, all it is that you've got to pick up some of those keywords from the job advertisement, from the position description, and basically, I don't want to say scatter it across your job application, but strategically place it. No, you know, use the same terminology, but then unpack that for the recruiter and say, you know, so for example, if they're wanting somebody with exceptional communication and negotiation skills, pick that up as your keyword and then unpack that for them in terms of your skill set. What does that mean? So, you know, just kind of mirroring the language that's used in the job advertisement.
So when you're doing that, mirroring the language, using those keywords, that's going to get picked up by the application tracking system. But then presumably at some point, it also gets in front of a real human. And so what's the role of the real human in that when they're reading your application?
So basically, yeah, so you're on to the next stage. A real human being reads it. And basically, they want to see whether you've connected your experience with what is expected in the role that you are applying for. So, okay, a lot of your experience has been in the teaching environment, but have you used what you have to connect with what is going to be expected in, the role that you're applying for? So let's say, for example, in your role, if you're meant to go out there and you're meant to liaise with vendors, etc., you've got to demonstrate to your prospective employer that you have an understanding of their environment. Okay, so that's, I guess a lot of the times that's the missing key for a lot of people. They just say, I'm good at communications, I'm good at writing, but they don't draw the connection. They don't draw the connection between their skills and what the employer needs. And even as simply as doing that, the employer is going to say, oh, she gets it. She understands our environment. She understands what we need. And, I'd like to invite her in for an interview. So that's why it's so important too. Your resume is not a static document. It's really, it's a document that you need to continue to tailor specifically for every role that you apply for. So that's where I think, I have to keep on pushing that message to people. If I've done your resume for you, it's beautiful. But, you've got to still do a little bit of work to tweak it each time for every role that you apply for. It's going to be very evident if you just leave it as is and you just shoot it out to every single role that you apply for. A recruiter can see it's just generic. It hasn't, no work has or no thought has gone into it to adapt it for the role. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's really crucial to getting past that next stage. What about cover letters? Where do they fit in?
Cover letters, it's interesting. I've had a lot of conversations about cover letters in the past week. And, there's two schools of thoughts. One is that they're absolutely not necessary. People don't read it, recruiters don't read it, etc. But can I just tell you, I've rarely seen a job advertisement that doesn't ask for a cover letter. So if it does ask for one, you need to supply one. Don't listen to these people who go, oh, it doesn't get read, and then just go, oh, it doesn't get read, so I'm just going to, apply with my resume. It's a big no-no. And basically it signals to the employer that you haven't read the instructions on the job advertisement.
Right.
So every single time, supply a cover letter if it's asked for. Now, it's interesting. I sat down with a really, really experienced HR manager, and this is her comment. She said, "Oh, I don't really even read the cover letter." And I'm like, "But how about if you have two candidates who are pretty much neck to neck? What then? How do you then kind of select the best person? We go to the cover letter. Now, the cover letter is different." It's funny, isn't it? The cover letter is different to the resume in that, of course, there's going to be some similar information. But the cover letter is really your opportunity to communicate your motivation. Why do you want to be there? Why do you want this job? What do you know about the organization? So it really can help you stand out in a very flooded market, in a very competitive market.
Yeah.
And I always encourage people, show your motivation, show that you've done a little bit of research in the organization and maybe anticipated some of the challenges they might face because of a change they're going through or because of some environmental, change, like maybe the pandemic, I don't know, something like that. What are some of the possible challenges that they are going to face and how are you the solution to that problem?
That's great. And I think that's, in any context, where any service that we provide, whether it's, going into a workplace to, do filing or whatever, it's all about solving someone's problem, isn't it? So like I help teachers get out of teaching. Their problem is they think they have no options. And so they want to look at the possibilities. Part of the role of this podcast is to help them to see this is one way forward, going to apply for a job that already exists and that you don't have to create for yourself. So, okay. So we've got to the point now where the HR manager has selected our cover letter. It's amazing. We've clearly demonstrated, Donna has clearly demonstrated that she is a great fit for this organization. And then they invite her to an interview. So this is where your expertise really comes to the fore, Georgina, because I think this is something that I feel like I don't know a lot about. I've done a few interviews, for teacher roles, but not many. I did actually. My escape route came via the not-for-profit sector. I think they were very kind in the way they interviewed, and maybe not as rigorous or as exacting as a corporate role might be. I could be wrong, but I feel like that was my experience. It was quite a kind of warm and friendly environment context. But going into a corporate role, what would that look like? What happens? Tell us what happens, because some of these people that are in the audience listening to us or watching us on YouTube might not have had an interview for 30 years.
Yeah. Look, the job interview can really vary. So recently I know that a client that I worked with, she really expected the conversation to be this massive grilling of her technical expertise. But in fact, all the CFO wanted was to have a quick chat with her to see, is this person relatable? Can she, hold a conversation? Can we work with her? So, you'll have those sorts of interviews where it's purely about, I can see that you're super qualified on paper. I just want to see how you are as a people person. Can I talk to you?
Right.
Can I see myself working with you? So that's one aspect of it. And so I always say, as technically good as you are, don't forget, it's also important to show what a good people person you are, because ultimately, I guess that's the test for, cultural fit, whether you are a good fit for an organization. But typically, though, the job interview has, people will use behavioral questions. So basically asking you to tell them a story from your past that demonstrates your capability in a specific area. So some of the typical questions are like, tell me about a time when you faced a conflict in the workplace.
Yeah, I've definitely
how did
heard
you
that
handle
one
that situation? Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
okay.
And a really good way of demonstrating your experience there is I always recommend using the STAR principle, which is situation, task, action, and results. And that keeps you very focused. I think without that structure, a lot of people can tend to waffle on and not come to a conclusion in their response. So basically saying, this is the role that I held, and this is the problem that I faced. This is the action that I took to solve the problem, and this is the result that I achieved as a result of the action that I took. So really clearly laying out for the interview panel what you did and the outcome that was achieved.
So that was Georgina, just to go back. It was a STAR. It was a situation, task,
task. That's right.
Action, and then results.
And results.
Nice.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things too, and I'll just add to this, is that when you select your examples, again, it's really important that you spend some time thinking about the examples that you are going to put forward. Because typically what I find when I'm coaching clients is that they've got examples, but the examples are not kind of at the level that it needs to be. So for example, if you're going for a manager role, but you're giving me a stakeholder example that is very junior. So you're not dealing with people who are at a senior level, you're dealing with people at a very junior level, maybe at an officer level or at a consultant level. So when somebody gives me an example like that and they're going for a manager role, the question that I ask myself as an interview panel member is, will they be able to deal with, high level stakeholder relationships? Because all the examples that they've given me is, I don't want to say low level, but it's not, you know what I mean? It's not really high level stakeholder relationship management. So you really need to be careful about the examples that you pick.
Okay, so that's scary for me, thinking about what that might look like in practice. I'm trying to think of situations where I was in a high level stakeholder situation where I had to have a conversation. I'm thinking, are you talking about like me as a general classroom teacher talking to the deputy principal, say? Is that the kind of conversation you're talking about? Okay. Or what about a parent conversation? Because let's face it, they're actually the client. The parent is the client. They're the ones, bringing their child to the school to use the service of the school. If you think of a business model for schools, which I think we all agree probably that's how they are now. And so a lot of parents have, a lot of teachers have high anxiety about those parent conversations because they can be, quite intense. Are they a high level stakeholder? Who's the high level stakeholder in a school?
I think the complexity, you got to think about the complexity of what you're facing. So you're right. The parent, I mean, I'm a parent of school age children. So I guess if you sat down and really thought about the impact of your interaction with the stakeholder, what does that look like? So if I, as a teacher, come across as not being helpful, or I sound like I'm not taking on board the concerns of the parent, reputationally for my school, what impact is that going to have? I guess it depends on the personality of the parent. The reputation of the school might be tarnished. So you got to think about it. So yes, I think in that sense, they are a high level stakeholder, because you have to be really careful about how you communicate to them and really show, yes, I've taken on board your concerns and this is the action that I'm taking to solve your problem, and really kind of appease them. Right. So, so this is where you have to sit down and think, what impact am I having? And where some of the issues lie with, when people are applying for roles or they're thinking about the examples, they don't think that what they do is important. And they go, oh, no, I just do that. That's just my job and it's not that important. But when you really sit down and think about, I'm talking to a parent and some of the impacts that might occur because of how I handle the situation, it can have, far-reaching impacts, positive or negative. So really think about that, what sort of impact you might have because of the action that you've taken.
Yeah, that's really valuable advice, I think, because I think there's often other stakeholders too that teachers forget that they're interacting with. So, for instance, I used to help run the school production. We would have to deal with the arts centre, and all their admin and management team to put on a show. And so that's a whole other group of people that we've been able to deal with at a fairly high level, because we're talking about a lot of money and ticketing and security, and there's a whole lot of things involved in those decisions. And maybe we forget as teachers that this is a high level of capacity that we're operating at, and not sort of unpacking what it means to be able to interact with all those different people. It's a massive communication skill set that teachers have, I think, to talk to a student, the parent, the colleague, the boss, and then all the external stakeholders, maybe the media. Sometimes they come in to film or photograph some event in the school. So we used to run Anzac Day service where we'd bring in, a soldier, and we'd have media there, photographing and filming the event, and so many things that teachers are capable of. And we forget, I think, because we're so caught up in our own little world that we forget that we actually are interacting with the wider world. Okay.
Can I just add there that teachers are teachers are brand ambassadors. And, typically when I'm talking to other mums and dads, we talk about the quality of a teacher, which teacher is good, which teacher is bad, is this teacher helpful, and then that also then dictates whether we, through word of mouth, share with our friends, family members, or like, come to this school, we've got fantastic teachers here. So don't underestimate the impact that you have as a teacher. I think this goes for all professions too. People tend to underestimate what they do, but really it can have a major impact.
That's great advice. I actually had a message yesterday from a parent who I met in 2006, my first year of teaching. I taught her son art, and she just sent me a quick message to say that the radio was interviewing or they were talking about teachers and education, and I was able to get on there. I actually got on the talkback yesterday, which was exciting. But I'm like, wow, this relationship that I developed way back in 2006 is still a really powerful, relevant relationship now. And she thought of me straight away when that opportunity came up because, she trusted me that I would, say the right thing or whatever, I guess. But I just felt really honored that this parent who I've become friends with now, we met way back then, and I was my first year of teaching, and it was her first child at school. So it was like, I don't know, it was just nice to think that we've got that ongoing relationship. So there's definitely that trust that you develop with the people in the school, and I love what you're saying about being brand ambassadors. And I think one of the comments I made in that interview yesterday was about having a career mentor that helps you manage your career. And I think those kinds of conversations where you talk about how do you behave in the workplace and how do you represent yourself to other people, how do you represent your school, how do you represent the profession, are really important conversations that we should be having with teachers, and they probably wouldn't want to leave if they had that kind of level of support. But anyway, let's assume that Donna is now at the point where she's going into the interview. She's all excited. They're going to ask her these questions. What should she do from a sort of physical point of view to prepare? Like, what should she be wearing to an interview like that?
In the corporate environment, I think, you kind of, we all have personalities, and some of us like a bit of color. Melbourne is a very kind of black suit, gray suit. We're not very colorful in Melbourne, but I would suggest that, if it's for a corporate role, wear your standard corporate colors initially, to the workplace. That could be a navy blue, a black suit, skirt, pants, just, and really look at the title of the role. Is it a manager role? So if it's a manager role, I'd say wear a jacket. If it's more of a consultant role, maybe lose the jacket, that kind of thing, but making sure that you are very presentable. So I guess this is where a little bit of research into the organization is going to be very vital. Go into LinkedIn. Let's have a look at, some of the people who work there. What do their pictures look like? What are they wearing? Right. And, you can get a sense of, okay, so, it's very formal. So I need to kind of mirror that so they can see that culturally I might be a good fit for that workplace. So, so things like that you can actually discern from pictures. And typically nowadays, if you go into any website, they'll have pictures of the leadership group, and you can see what are the leadership group wearing, and then mirror that in terms of, what you wear to the job interview. Yeah.
Right. So I'm hearing this word mirror come up a few times. So it sounds like that's actually really important. We're mirroring the language in the job application, and then again we're mirroring it in the cover letter and then in the interview process as well. So that's quite, and I guess that's because we as humans, we're wired to look for patterns and look for similarities, and so that we feel that connection. And so that's what you're kind of really addressing there.
Yeah.
All right. So what else?
So sorry, Elizabeth. I was just going to say it's kind of like, I mean, if you know what neuro-linguistic programming is all about, and like for me, neuro at a very basic level, NLP is really about, you establish rapport, and by kind of doing similar things to the person that you want to establish rapport with. And this is this is basically the science, I guess, behind, how do you stand out in a job application process? It's when, as a recruiter, I can see, oh, she actually knows the kind of language that we use. So, recently I helped a job applicant, and they went for a role, and the company used the terminology winning together instead of, be a team player. So, if I put that in my application, the recruiter already knows, oh, she's actually done a little bit of research and she's found out that this is the terminology that we use. So you're kind of almost saying to them, I'm already part of the team. I'm halfway to being part of the team there, because I know the language that you use. So that, is another connection point. So it's always about connection. So that's why I guess mirroring, and I don't want to say mirroring in the sense of you lose your personality or you lose who you are, but it's kind of just saying it's just about establishing that connection so that they can see that you are connected, that you have invested your time in researching who they are, and you have an understanding of the culture already. So
yeah. Great. Okay. So let's say Donna has a great interview, then she's got to wait to hear back.
Yeah.
What happens on, say she gets the job, first day of work, what should she do to prepare for that?
That's really good, isn't it? This is interesting. I just coached somebody on this question about, how you engage with your new team. I think, it's important just to establish that relationship very quickly. Go around, introduce yourself. And I think it's important to just basically show your new team members that, you're here to learn. You're here to learn. And, you will be guided by them in terms of, what's the lay of the land? How do we do things here? And I think it's a lot about, listening as well, listening and observing what you're hearing, to say, okay, so this is how things are done here. Because for me, I'm always suggesting to people, it's all about continuous improvement as well. Okay, so you're not gonna go in there and just change everything around. But I think you have a role to play in terms of saying, hey, I'm a newcomer here and I'm here to learn, but I'm also here to show that I care about the business. And I show how I care about the business by going, can we do things a little bit different here? Will that, improve our productivity or our business process flow and things like that. So that's how I would suggest you go, and you would go and introduce yourself and just really demonstrate to your colleagues that you're there to learn from all of them, but also at the same time know that you are a very capable person. You bring expertise and you bring value to the organization. And, you're not just going to sit there and just do your work. Because, who wants that? Because that means that a person is not really engaged.
Yeah.
So, you show your engagement by taking an interest of what's happening around you and going, can we do this differently and better?
Nice. Yeah, that's great. And I think just being willing to ask those questions is also really important. I remember when you just made me go back in time. When I first started, I remember the first wet day we had, I didn't know what to do because it was my first teaching job, and I was, had these students in the class. They weren't allowed out because it was raining. And I didn't know that they were meant to go back to their normal classroom teacher, and I could go and have my, go to the bathroom, whatever, in my bio break, and then come back and collect them and take them back to art. And so I just kept them the whole time. And then I'm like, I really need to go to the toilet now. And I don't know what to do. And just no one explained to me what happened on a wet day, in a wet day timetable. And, in hindsight, that would have been great if my mentor had shown me that. But of course, she was actually teaching in a different part of the school, and she wasn't in my area. And so, just asking questions and knowing who to ask is really important too, isn't it? Like actually finding out what's the chain of command in this organization, so I know who to ask for help and for what help. Who do I go to for what particular help when I need it? Awesome. All right. So is there anything else we should be thinking about for Donna and her new career in the corporate world?
I think, it's really interesting. So even when I have moved into a new role, you put so much pressure on yourself, don't you? You think, gosh, I've got to show that, that they've made the right decision. And you put so much pressure on yourself to be able to perform straight away. But understand this, that when you go into a new role, and especially if it's a career transition, things are going to be new. And you're kind of like starting from the beginning a little bit. And so, don't put too much pressure on yourself to, to just be outstanding straight away. I think just take your time to really soak in the culture of the place and really learn the ropes. And, that performance will come. We're always our harshest critic, I think. And we think, oh, yeah, we need to really kind of show them like from day one that we can do all of the things that they expect us to do. But that's not realistic. And so, that puts a lot of pressure on ourselves. And, it's important that we know what our value is. We've been selected for the role.
Yes.
So it's important to remind ourselves that, hey, yes, so they've seen potential in me and I'm here to learn.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be the person who knows all the answers. And that skill, like we just talked about, Elizabeth, is so important. Asking questions. And really being open to maybe not being the expert for a while, because maybe in our teaching role, we were seen as the expert and now we're not seen as the expert. So we're going through a little bit of a role shift a little bit, but then there'll come a time when we are seen as the expert again. So we've got to be comfortable with that transition.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of teachers who, and their fear is often around becoming a novice again, going back to being almost incompetent and feeling like they don't know how to manage the situation, and what a challenge that is for someone who's maybe been the expert for the last 20 years. And now suddenly they're plunged into not knowing how to behave and not knowing what to do with their day. Like I know as I was in the not-for-profit sector, it was very unclear in one role that I had about how I should structure my days. And I found it really difficult because I'm like, I'll go to work, but what do you actually want me to do while I'm here? Because no one's explicitly told me, and they all were busy and they just didn't give me that direction that I needed. And I found it really frustrating. And it wasn't until like really the last week of that job where we realized that there was this whole lot of compliance stuff that we hadn't done for our volunteers to make sure they all had their working with children checks up to date. And we were flat out busy for the whole week, ringing everyone and checking their documentation and all of those things. And I'm like, why weren't we doing this all along? It would have been so much nicer to felt busy all that time, but also we would have been on top of it or not in a big panic right at the end. And yeah, I just think if there's some real clarity about your job description and a role description, that would be a really good thing to ask for when you start a new role. Just say, could I please have a job description so that I can make sure that we're on the same page? And then maybe it needs to be, edited or evaluated, but at least there's a beginning there.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, an organization also has a part to play in terms of, preparing their staff. But aside from that, if that's something that you can't control, what you can control is that you demonstrate to, your new team members, to your new manager, hey, I'm keen to get going, but I need you to help me and tell me where I can be of most value, where I can help. And so I think, you can only do what you have, control over. So, as a new staff member, and I just remember many years ago when I started in a new team, I'm all about asking questions because I have no clue. So I'm not here, as the expert. I'm here to learn from everybody. And I think about a manager, for instance, when a manager comes in, they are not going to necessarily say, I know everything and, start ordering people around. I think a good manager is going to go, so, tell me about the team, tell me about what you do. And then from there and from that understanding can then decide, okay, so maybe, this needs to happen here and that needs to happen there. But it's all about you facilitating, I think, conversations and really saying, hey, I'm not here to take over anything. I'm here to just learn from myself and hopefully make things better. I think, if you come across like that, because I would be affronted by somebody who just walks in and goes, I'm the expert, I'm here, I've arrived.
Yes.
I think I would work better with somebody who goes, I don't know, I'm new, I don't know what I'm doing, can you help me? So
Yes.
I think that approach, I would be more receptive to working with somebody like
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. I think that's excellent advice. So, Georgina, as we wrap up this conversation, I just want to ask you one further question. What's your favorite song?
My favorite song. I'm a big fan of K-pop. If you know
Okay.
what that is,
Yeah, I do know what that is.
Korean pop music. Yeah, I'm a big fan of BTS. I don't know if there are any ARMY members out there, but BTS, a very popular Korean boy group, and I like them because they seem to have, more recently with their music, very uplifting type songs. So their most recent one is called Permission to Dance. I won't sing it for you, but yeah, it's just a really upbeat song. And I think especially during this time when, people are going through a lot of, different things, it's a real kind of song that lifts your spirits and just basically says that, it's okay. We're coming out of this. And you can be who you are, and just have fun, and not get too bogged down by just have fun, basically. Don't get too bogged down by issues and problems and things like that. And I think we need a lot of that at the moment, a lot of positivity. And so I really enjoy those pop songs, whereas I used to be a big ballad person, but now I'm like, oh, those dance songs are lots of fun. So
Well, I think there's a time and a place for music like that, isn't there? Like in the Depression, they had these, stupid, like that, in what is it, in South Pacific, that happy talkie song. You know that one? And it was very popular because it was this just cutesy, boppy, fun song. I guess it's the same kind of thing. I'm going to have to listen to some K-pop now.
I recommend it. I recommend it on those really challenging days. I just switch it on, and dance away in the safety of my own home. So
when no one's watching you dance. Wonderful. Georgina Chai, thank you so much for coming on the Get Out of Teaching podcast today. It's been great fun.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for having me.
You've been listening to the Get Out of Teaching podcast, presented by Larksong Enterprises, with your host, Elizabeth Diakos. Do you know someone else who could benefit from hearing more stories of hope and transition from teachers all around the world? Please take a moment to share this and other episodes via your podcast app. Each share helps me reach listeners just like you who can benefit from this content. The Get Out of Teaching podcast is proud to be part of the Experts on Air podcast network. For show notes and other resources, please visit larksong.com.au/podcast.